In celebration of the upcoming May 4th release of Avengers Infinity War, I recently began a weekly series of reviews for movies set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Last week, I did a review of Captain America: The First Avenger, so let's move on to the next entry in the MCU, The Avengers. After Loki steals the powerful Tesseract from S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury quickly assembles a group of the world's most impressive heroes, including Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, the Incredible Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye to stop Loki before he can use the Tesseract to summon an army that will help him conquer the world. Man, I remember just having my mind blown when this movie first came out. The idea of taking so many different characters from different franchises, bringing them all together and having them interact in one massive story, it was pretty unique and revolutionary at the time. Sure, we've had shared universes on TV and in the movies before, the Universal monster movies might come to mind, the good ones anyway, but really none of them were done on the same scale as the Avengers or arguably had the same effect on the audience. Seriously, when this movie came out, I saw it more times than any sane person probably should. I'm honestly not kidding, I lost count after like 20. But come on, can you really blame me? Where else were you gonna see something like that single shot of all the Avengers working together to take down the Chitauri? Or hear something like that iconic theme song? I saw this movie so many times, it got to the point where I even started noticing things nobody would normally care to notice, like how Tom Hiddleston always seemed to be walking around with his hands up for some reason. Seriously, what the hell is he doing? Is he practicing his Ricky Bobby impression?
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
Of course, that was how I felt when the movie first came out about 6 years ago. Now that we've moved on and we've seen more from the MCU, does the Avengers still invoke that same sense of awe and wonder that it did all those years ago? Not really. I mean, it's definitely still enjoyable, but it's not as great as I remember. The story's kinda like the first Avenger, in the sense that it's pretty simple and even predictable at times. It's just the classic, everybody has problems with each other, but they all team up to fight the bad guy at the end type of thing. I can't really complain about it too much though, considering that's how everything worked out in the original comics. Plus, it does kinda set up plot points that were expanded on by a decent number of other MCU movies, like Civil War and Spider-Man: Homecoming. Plus, the beginning of the movie, with Loki coming back and stealing the Tesseract from S.H.I.E.L.D., is actually pretty exciting, with plenty of action, gunfire, explosions, and even a car chase. That having been said, a good chunk of the movie after that is actually pretty boring. There's just so much talking and people getting stuff, like S.H.I.E.L.D. gathering the Avengers, Loki talking to his people, this one guy losing an eyeball. I know we have to get scenes like this for exposition and all that, and thankfully it doesn't feel like it takes too long to get through, but at the same time, you just kind of wish that the movie would hurry the hell up so you can get back to the cool stuff.
Kneel. Not today.
Yeah, like that. Which reminds me, side note, I actually kinda like the fact that Cap struggling to find himself and deal with his missing 70 years is mostly kept to a minimum here and left more for the Winter Soldier to deal with. I know some people might be a little annoyed considering how the first Avenger came out the year before this one, and you'd think it would be a great idea to move forward with that idea immediately instead of waiting 2 years to mess around with it, but I think mostly leaving it out helps spread the focus among the rest of the characters, and the flashbacks we get when Steve is introduced in this movie help get the point across anyway. And speaking of the other characters, I especially liked how, even when faced with an overwhelming amount of enemies, the Avengers' first priority is keeping all the civilians safe. Not to rip on DC, but this is how they should have done the big fight scenes in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, with the heroes caring more about saving the people rather than just trying to win the fight. That's what being a hero is all about, isn't it? Now, I can't really praise the story too much. There are some parts that kinda suck, like Hawkeye being a mind-controlled bad guy for most of the movie. I mean, come on, he seemed cool in Thor, and he definitely has some pretty damn good archery skills. He could have been a great character for Joss Whedon to flesh out. But no, we have to wait 3 years for anything like that. And does anybody else think it's weird that nobody's watching Banner on the helicarrier? You'd think a guy that can turn into a rampaging green monster would warrant being watched at all times, right? Although I guess it makes sense because S.H.I.E.L.D's still a lazy mess. Seriously, how can they make a giant flying aircraft carrier that can turn invisible, but they can't figure out that Tony's hacking into their systems until after he's already done it? And who the hell is this waitress? I know in the deleted scenes she's somebody who gets saved by Cap, she sees who he is and recognizes him from earlier, blah blah blah, but the actual movie doesn't explain it at all and just randomly gives her a ton of focus. It's just kind of bizarre without any setup. And speaking of setup, what in the f made Loki think bringing together a group of superheroes in the hope that they would hate each other would be great for his plan?
Not a great plan.
The actors, much like the plot, have their ups and downs. They're decent, but they're not perfect. And I know that sounds weird considering how everybody's pretty much lifted from their last appearance, but that's exactly the problem. There's really no character development from anybody, outside of the obvious, oh hey, we're totally gonna work together in the future thing you'd already expect from this movie. Now that's not to say there's zero character development here. Tony Stark has a great moment during the final fight that I really couldn't picture him doing in any of his previous appearances. It's actually really cool, and it gives you an idea where the character might be heading in future movies, like Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron. Now of course I can't talk about the characters in this movie without mentioning Mark Ruffalo's portrayal of Bruce Banner. This dude feels like a completely different character compared to the Banner we saw in The Incredible Hulk, which I guess makes sense considering he's been on the run for a while, but at the same time I almost wish we had Ed Norton back, if only because we could have had a more engaging performance. Ruffalo's Banner is more subdued than Norton's was, and sure, Ruffalo has a couple of intense moments, but for the most part he's just so meh most of the time.
I'm sorry, that was mean.
On the flip side though, his version of the Hulk is pretty great, all things considered. Sure, he's not as savage as he was in The Incredible Hulk, but the character does have some scary moments here, and overall seems like he just got way stronger in between movies. Overall, I'm really impressed with the level of focus each of these characters got. You'd think it would be hard for multiple main characters to share the screen, but Joss Whedon does a pretty good job of juggling everybody and making sure they all, except for Hawkeye, get about an equal amount of screen time. We also get some really good special effects this time around, which is really saying something considering a majority of the effects are CGI. I'd even say what we got in the Avengers is probably better than what we saw from a majority of Phase 1. Of course it helps that this movie had a way bigger budget than most of those movies, but whatever. Now while the effects are pretty good this time around, the designs actually suffered. Like, check out the aliens we get in this movie. Both the Chitauri and the Other feel uninspired and very dull to look at. They just look like generic monsters or something. Like, come on Marvel, you have decades worth of comics you could have pulled from for inspiration, and this is what we're stuck with? Worse than that is the new Captain America uniform. For fuck's sake, that suit is fucking horrible. It looks like an attempt at a modern take on the cloth costume he wore in his USO days, but it ends up looking ugly as shit, and it stands out in a bad way compared to everybody else's. Seriously, who the hell came up with this thing? Can Marvel get their money back from whoever came up with this abomination?
It does look like.
So overall, is the Avengers the big badass Marvel Cinematic Universe team-up movie you've been dreaming for? Well, yeah, I'd say so. The characters are what you remember from their individual movies, and it's great to see them come together and fight a singular enemy. The action is kick-ass, and even the humor isn't as awkwardly crammed in as it was in some of the other Phase 1 movies.
Meow meow? What's meow meow?
But it does lack some depth, and I found that crossovers in later movies tend to be better remembered than this one. That having been said, I definitely recommend popping this one in if you're looking for something to watch. I think you'd have a fun time, even if you're like me and you've seen this movie like a billion times. But anyways guys, that's my take on the Avengers. If you guys agreed with anything I've said in this review, or maybe you have your own thoughts about something I didn't mention here, then go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and click that like button, and if you're new, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button too. I've also got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and Patreon in the description. You should probably check those out too. And if you want to see more of my content, then you can click the link to my last video. It's right there in the middle of your screen. Alright, and I will see you all next time.